Good morning. Today is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022. This is the Urban Hope Refuge Morning Devotions. We are continuing our reading today from the 2022 Daily Bible Reading Guide published by the American Bible Society. For the month of July, we are reading under the theme, God's Renewing Word of Faith. Today, we are reading Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. And I am reading today in the New King James Version. The sub-theme is the memorial stones. Verse 1. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely passed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, for the place where the place where the firm. You shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, What do these stones mean? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they were there to this day. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely passed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan." Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, "Come up from the Jordan." And it came to pass, when the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched the dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones, when they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, "When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What are these stones?' then you shall let your children know, saying, 'Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land.' For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea when he dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all the people of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever." This concludes our reading for today of Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. The account of what is going on with the Israelites that I just read, the Israelites had waited 40 years for this, but now the time had come, and this memorable moment as they stride across the riverbank of the Jordan, opened for them by the miraculous power of God. From our reading yesterday, we shared with you the fact that after the children of Israel had gotten right to the point of crossing over to the promised land into Canaan, they realized that it was the season of harvest and that the riverbanks were, the waves were aggressive and the river was about to overflow. And in the river was so much debris and branches and things of that nature that as if they would walk through the water, they could trip and fall at any time and be washed away to their death by these big and heavy waves. So they were faced with this when they got there. But God made a way. So now, behind them, they leave the wearying decades of the 40 years of the wandering in a barren wilderness and the tragic memories that they would have of countless funerals of an entire generation of people. And why did all of this happen to them? It was because they would not trust God's promises. To trust God's promises, it requires faith. Faith that you trust God for the unknown, for the unseen, for what seems to be impossible. And it is impossible to us without the presence of God. Slavery in Egypt and the bare survival that they had as a nomadic people moving from one place to the other. That life are now bygone experiences because there is a new and welcome chapter now that opens before them as they are going into the land that God had promised their ancestors 40 years ago. Before them lay a land richer than any dream that they could have, more beautiful than their hopes, and more beautiful than their imagination. Now it is theirs, not by their might or anything that they did, but it is theirs by God's steadfast promise to them and their deceased ancestors before them. God made them a promise. And as I always say, God keeps his promises. You can count on it. They finally stand in Canaan. I imagine that to be kind of like when you move into a new house or a new apartment, yeah, or even a new church building. And you have all these visions and dreams of what you're going to do with that space. Well, you've envisioned it, you planned it, you imagine what you would do with it. But when you step into that front door, your emotions just soar. But it was even greater than that for the Israelites because they were to be the fulfillment of an ancient promise to their father Abraham, and it had to be overwhelming for them. But listen, God gave Joshua some very specific instructions that are recorded in the scripture that I just read. And for Joshua to be able to carry out those specific instructions that God had given him, he had to exercise his faith. After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, and remember, I told you yesterday as we read that it was hundreds of thousands of people that Joshua was leading into that promised land. And after the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua and told him exactly what to do. And the thing that is so amazing about this is that Joshua obeyed every single thing that God told him to do. And it was a challenge to the faith of God's people. But they were divinely following. Joshua did. So this is what happened when the impossible meets the promises of God. And listen, there are some impossibles in each one of our lives. We may never speak of it. We may never tell our closest friend, but as long as we tell God about those impossibles in our lives, God meets the impossible with the promises that he has made. Those stones that God told Joshua to have stacked, they weren't lightweight, they were heavy, that the priests had to carry, but they did, so that in time to come, stones naturally are not easy to stack, but God made it possible for them to stack those stones. And in years to come, the children would ask, what does this mean? And it would give them an opportunity, generation after generation, to tell of the goodness and mighty acts of God. And all of that took faith. Now you're going to meet your impossibles. Exercise your faith in God, and by all means, walk with the King and be a blessing.